session. Senators, please record your presence. Roll call. Mr. Clerk, please record.
I have a quorum present, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Are there any corrections for the journal?
I have no corrections.
Thank you, sir. Any message, reports, or announcements?
Mr. President, your Committee on Enrollment and Review reports LB 397, 481, 481A, and 593 to select file. That's all that I have, Mr. President.
Thank you, sir. While the legislature is in session and capable of transacting business, I propose to sign, do hereby sign LR 136. Member Senator Kavanaugh, I would like to recognize Dr. Carol LaCroix of Omaha, serving as today's family physician today. Dr. LaCroix is with us under the north balcony. Doctor, please rise so we can welcome you and thank you for coming to the Nebraska Legislature. First item is LB 657. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, 657 is on final reading. Senator Wayne, I have two amendments, Senator, with notes you wish to withdraw, specifically AM 1860 and AM 1913. Mr. President, Senator Wayne would move to return LB 657 to consider AM 1941.
Senator Wayne, you're recognized to open on your motion.
Colleagues, thank you, Mr. President. The infamous hemp bill is back after a couple of negotiations with the AG and a couple other parties who had some last-minute concerns. So I'm going to explain what this amendment does. It actually closes a hole in not this bill, but actually closes a hole in current law. Current law, because we already have a hemp program and because other states have a hemp programs, if somebody gets caught with plant material, particularly under a pound, I'm going to try to explain this the best that I can, but under a pound, it would be cost prohibited for counties to go out and test this plant material. So the issue was, how can counties continue to test? And I'm going to use a 16-year-old with a joint. It would cost $25 to $50 to get the plant material tested. Even if this bill doesn't pass, this issue is here. This is why it's an important amendment. Because currently, if this bill doesn't pass with this amendment, somebody can say this is hemp they have instead of a joint. If they do that, they have to test it. What happens with testing, it costs $50, and the fine on a hemp, or a joint, is $300. So it became cost prohibitive to prosecute low-level marijuana users. And that's the current situation because other states are passing hemp programs. So what this bill does two things. One, this amendment does two things. So one, it says, if you don't have proper documentation, one, the plant material can be seized by State Patrol or any peace officer. Two, if you have plant material and it's not documented, it is a fine up to $1,000. Reason why that's important, because I just explained, if you have a joint, it's $300. This gives prosecutors two options to say, well, instead of testing the joint at $50, I can just charge you with a misdemeanor underneath this act for not having the proper documentation for the plant material. So this is like a huge loophole that we're closing that really has nothing to do with our bill, but this bill provides a segue for us to create this law to stop low-level users of plant products to deal with it. Second, there was concerns about the capital or the need from the Department of Ag with the $50,000 appropriation. Well, because it had a general impact fund, we had to remove that. And what we did is we opened up 2 cash funds for transfers within their department to be able to have the flexibility to monitor and use their inspectors in a way that can monitor hemp. So we have a noxious weed inspector fund. We opened that up to allow a noxious weed inspector also to be able to inspect hemp to help offset the costs until the hemp program and the collection of their fees is large enough to pay for itself. So it's almost like they're borrowing from cash funds to make sure that this keeps going until the hemp farmers and producers generate enough cash to offset their loan and to pay for it themselves, which we believe can happen in 1 to 2 years. So again, this is a simple amendment. This amendment was worked on by the County Attorneys Association, and I want to thank Senator Hilgers for being a part of that conversation. This was also with the AG's office and the Department of Ag to make sure that we close a loophole that we currently have. And again, whether this bill passes or not, that loophole is there because Montana, Kentucky, other people have hemp programs. And so if you have, and essentially from a practical standpoint, a pound or less of marijuana, somebody can argue it's hemp. A kid on the street can say, no, I got this from Kentucky, it's hemp. And our prosecutors have to go back and say, we have to test it. And because of the low level of an ounce or less, which is a $300 fine, there's a cost prohibitive to it. So we're creating a new misdemeanor, class 4, up to $1,000 to close that loophole. And this is a very important amendment because we're gonna have to deal with this regardless of whether this bill passes. That people who have a pound or less can make that argument, and the county prosecutors and state patrol have an expense that they're gonna have to deal with that is cost prohibitive for testing, regardless of whether this bill passes or not. So this bill going forward actually closes a loophole and it allows the department the flexibility it needs to oversee and make sure the hemp program and our farmers can adequately grow and it can be monitored. And with that, I would ask for a green vote, and I'll be here to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Wayne. Debate is now open on Senator Wayne's motion to return the bill to select file for a specific amendment. Senator Lowe.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. I'm glad we've taken time on this bill because I believe Senator Wayne has come forth and made it better. Not that I agree with it. We need to close these loopholes that the federal government has caused us by putting hemp legal in the Farm Act. We're going to find more problems with this bill and with hemp in Nebraska. If we're worried about our children, which we say we are, then we ought to take a look at what's happening before us today and in the past few days. We say we're always worried about the children, but hemp and smoking of hemp, there are no regulations on. It's not tobacco. Our children will be able to smoke hemp and get a slight high. And with that, I'll wait till it returns to select file to continue my conversation. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Lowe. Senator Erdman.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. You know, we've had a lot of discussion about 657, excuse me, and we've talked about hemp production, and there's been comments made about this is going to help the farm economy, this is going to save farms, this is going to improve people's incomes. I don't believe that to be the case. And I appreciated Senator Lowe's stick-to-itiveness and his comments and what he's tried to do to keep us on the right path. I'll be keeping track and watching to see exactly how much hemp is growing and how much economic development this really does and how many farmers it really helps. What this will do is create a bunch of new farmers. This will create a bunch of farmers who have never grown anything in their life who will grow hemp, and for many other reasons. So this is the wrong way to go. I appreciate that we have tightened it up. That was needed. I appreciate that. But as Calvin Coolidge once said, it is better to kill a bad bill than to pass a good bill. And I believe this is not a good bill. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Erdman. Senator Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the legislature. Life for me is like a seamless web, a continuum. We do things along that continuum, but it continues to go. So yesterday is a part of what was, today is what is, and I want to continue from what happened yesterday, not just with Senator Groney, but other things that were done. The legislature yesterday reached a new low. So I had indicated that I will play the rest of the session according to the rules, if you want to call what happened by that term, which means I will take time, and there are things I'm going to read into the record. You all are on final reading, but when some other action is being taken, you can slip out the back door. So if you want to leave, you can do that. You know, that made me think of that song that this guy said, 50 ways to leave your lover. Just hop on the bus, Gus. Make a new plan, Stan. No need to be coy, Roy. Just listen to me. Well, hop on the bus, Gus. No need to discuss much. Drop off the key, Lee, and make yourself free. So you can just drop off the key, go out the back door, and do whatever you want to do, because I certainly intend to do what I want to do. And I'm going to read some things for you all that I said I would like to have made a matter of public record, forever record, as long as legislative proceedings are recorded, transcribed, and kept. This is something that I wrote some time ago, October 8th, 2015, and I was sending a series of writings about the death penalty to you all's governor, and this happened to be the 5th in that series, and I'm going to read exactly what I wrote. October 8th, 2015, Director Scott Frakes and Governor Pete Ricketts, Department of Correctional Services, regarding your problematic role in seeking procurement of banned execution drugs. Dear Director Frakes, I've made you aware of my penchant, P-E-N-C-H-A-N-T, for messaging via rhymes. Once again, the penchant prevails. Part 1, the elevation and devaluation of Scott Frakes by his boss, Governor Pete Ricketts. They say a picture is worth more than 1,000 words. That is a corruption of a statement that didn't have to do with pictures at all. But at any rate, I put little illustrations with this which I cannot have recorded. Part 1. Washington, as far as I know, is famed for neither forests nor lakes, But to that state, Nebraska did go to court the state's top jailer named Frakes. Frakes his surname, Scott is his first. He was neither the best nor the worst of candidates to serve as the head of prisons in Nebraska, 'twas said. Digressing, we're going to take a leisurely stroll anytime I undertake to read something, because I'm not in a hurry. All we have is time.
1 minute.
We may not have a lot, but I'm going to spend some of it. Mint new governor, Peter Ricketts, sought someone to enter the thickets, thorny and tangled, to get a handle on a system awash in scandal. A former director, Harold Clark, managed that system before the dark clouds of scandal billowed and hovered above the system wherein was discovered, under Robert Houston's management, ills that caused great disadvantagement to the system and inmates alike, scorching Bob Houston like lightning's strike. Predictably, Houston abruptly resigned. Then Governor Heinemann promptly assigned Michael Kinney to take Houston's place. The scandal continued unfolding apace. Then Pete Ricketts, as governor elected, jettisoned Kinney.
That's time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Chambers. Senator Hilgers.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I was wondering if Senator Wayne would respond to a question or two.
Senator Wayne, would you yield, please?
Yes.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. So you and I were just having a conversation off the mic, and I was wondering if you could help clarify for the body how the state plan submission process would work if 657 were to pass.
So currently, we have a research program at the University of Nebraska to grow hemp. We will expand that immediately to allow farmers to grow underneath the research process in which they can do research and grow hemp. Then once the federal government starts accepting applications for state plans, which we believe will be in 2020, this bill will direct our department to submit a state plan, and then once approved, we will operate underneath commercial hemp growing process.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. So if I'm hearing you correctly, for the commercial side, if 657 is passed for commercial purposes, those will not go into effect until the state plan is approved. Is that right?
Correct.
And what is your understanding, if any, as to what the FDA will be doing from a federal regulation perspective?
So on May 30th, their rules close, or their comments close for rulemaking. So there'll be some more guidance for our department. So if you read our bill, it's a lot of may language that they may need to do this based off of federal regs. And then in 2020, we'll submit it. But here's the thing, if we don't submit it, by 2021, the feds have already said, then you will have a default plan, which will be the Fed plan.
Right.
So that's kind of how it'll work.
Okay, thank you, Senator Wayne. So as Senator Wayne mentioned, we worked together and had some conversations with the county attorney's office. There were some concerns raised that we worked through. Part of those concerns are addressed in AM 1941. I really want to thank Senator Wayne for his really diligent and his work throughout, and his open ear to the concerns that we raised and the discussion that we've had over the last couple months. I know he's worked incredibly hard on this. Colleagues, ultimately, at the end of the day, this issue is largely taken out of our hands when the Farm Bill was passed. There is an explicit provision within the Farm Bill that restricts states' abilities to impact interstate commerce. That's fully within the federal government's interstate commerce powers. If we are to regulate intrastate in a way that conflicts with the interstate powers or the prohibition under the Farm Bill, I actually think we would be, our state restrictions would likely be null or void under the Farm Bill. And so I actually think this is something I would prefer to have something in state law that we can control, that we can take advantage of the option given it to us by the federal government to put our own plan rather than have the regulations dictated to us by the FDA. There are some additional issues that Senator Wayne and I have discussed, and there's some other model legislation around the country that I think we might be able to take advantage of. And those are things that I think we'll look at over the summer and fall. I don't think there's anything that has to be in this bill today. So with the amendment on 1941 on LB 657, the work that's been done, I feel comfortable voting for this bill. I appreciate, again, Senator Wayne's work and others who have worked through these issues over the course of this session, and I would encourage you to green vote on the amendment and the underlying bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Hilgers. Senator Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to vote for Senator Wayne's motion, but I'm going to get my few ounces of flesh along the way. I had gotten to the point in the rhyme where Bob Houston, the former director of corrections, had resigned. A guy named Kinney replaced him, and that guy was put in place by then Governor Heineman. Then when Heineman left, I'll pick it up. Then Pete Ricketts, as governor-elected, jettisoned Kennedy, not unexpected. Wholesale corrections, house cleaning was faded, thus an opening for Frakes was created. Former Director Clark, as I said, prior to Robert Houston, was head of prisons, and I did know him well, respected him greatly, so I tell that based upon his conversation, I did proffer the recommendation that we confirm Frakes' nomination by the governor to the station Houston previously occupied. Frakes was confirmed. I was satisfied. In Washington, under Clark, Frakes worked. As deputy, duties he never shirked, nor corners cut, Clark reported to me. Thus Clark's words to my support were key. Frakes' past life in Washington is done. Now on a different course, Scott Frakes must run. Part 3, the devaluation of Scott Frakes. For a professional, it seems obscene to serve as a cog in a killing machine. Men and women for whom he is to care find themselves in a killer's foul lair. It is a truism, quote, all make mistakes. I made a whopper endorsing Scott Frakes. Do I fault Clark? No, for it is not strange. One whom one thinks that one knows well can change. To perceive something, each thinks as it is. A has one view, to the contrary, B his. May each be right in the way he deceived. Only one thing is sure, they disagree. Experiences differ, accounting for why people so often don't see eye to eye. Although I'm clearly not one whit religious, an issue exists where my thought is contiguous with church, pope, and bishops. Our difference is nil. All of us hold that the state should never kill. State execution, we hold, should be ended. Frakes and Governor Ricketts defend it. My strong contention is death by the state manifests vengeance hot-wired by hate. Vengeance from hate cannot be distinguished. Civilized justice is by it extinguished. Each time the state executes in a fit, civilization is lessened a bit. As refined discourse is debased by profanity, state executions degrade our humanity. Although admittedly not strong on piety, ferociously I strive for a humane society. Ever a just state must be on its guard. Killing is easy, showing mercy is hard. Cain, the first murderer, God did not drill him. Instead, he marked Cain and said, none shall kill him. This gives the lie to those who have said, a killer of man, man his blood shall shed. Rome was a state that observed eye for eye. At that state's hand, Jesus, innocent, did die. Society's fragile fabric is frayed when state law to kill citizens is laid. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Chambers. Senator Chambers, you recognize your third opportunity.
Part 4. I thought I saw Senator Lowe's light on. I guess he decided as they stay in the military to stand down. And I hope he's pointing at me and smiling. Maybe he'll give me some time. We'll see, because this is my third time, and I will have to wait until we get to another stage, which is bringing the bill back. Then I will be able to continue. Part 4. What's money got to do with it? As surely as cotton holds the boll weevil, the love of money is the root of all evil. So says the scripture. Did Scott Frakes read it? It seems if he did, he chose not to heed it. A rich man's accustomed to buying his way. Money assures him that he'll have his say. He does not sit, he's ensconced in the saddle. Thus lacking money are so many cattle. A man for his purpose, a rich man may try one. If he can't woo him, he simply will buy one. He has discovered what never will fail. Men in the market are always for sale. Men not accustomed to status or place always succumb to cash waved in their face. All rich men know to the roots of their souls, the hand that does feed is the hand that controls. How may one tell if a man has been bought? Observe how he acts. Does he do as one ought, who acts upon principle? Or is he strained, behaving by rote like a dog that is trained? Is he a rowboat whose master may row him? Such are some hallmarks by which one may know him. Does Frakes' behavior bespeak one who's free, or one who is captive? Sit tight and let's see. Part 5, Before the Fall. Since I'm proposing to speak what is true, I am obliged to give the devil his due. 32 years Frakes spent in corrections, during which time he saw many defections among rank and file. There is no denying. Low paid, long hours did make the job trying. Barred cells, bleak corridors, tense prison yard. Daily fare were for stressed prison guard. Guard is a term that's much less in use, besmirched by the stigma of prisoner abuse. Guards are now officers. Does the new name signal a genuine change in the game? Or is it actually, let us be blunt, merely for public consumption a front? Convicts or prisoners, inmates are called. Prison reform has virtually stalled. This brings to mind, dress a monkey as you will, no matter how called, is a monkey still. And that line, each student of poetry knows, a rose is a rose is a rose is a rose. Specifically, back to the Scott Frakes matter, he commenced at the foot of the ladder, at which low level he did not long stay, ever intent to inch and claw his way upwards, determined to let nothing stop his climbing before he surmounted the top of the corrections or prison's profession. Reaching the top had become his obsession. Painful awareness of standard jail norms spurred him to make humane prison reforms. Notoriously known to all is the whole, filling that what some deem a critical role. But on his path to corrections refinement, Frakes cut back on solitary confinement. His experience had been instructive. Solitary confinement was counterproductive. In his psyche, conviction did burn. A wise man is ever willing to learn. I'll stop at that point. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Chambers. Senator Wayne, you're recognized to close on your motion to return the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I just want to stress the importance of this amendment again. There is a current loophole in statute because the federal government has allowed hemp to be grown in other states that we are trying to close, that anybody today can make that argument that it's hemp, and this allows for prosecution for not having the proper documentation to transport hemp. And this also allows the Department of Agriculture to the flexibility to make sure they are overseeing the hemp program the way we plan as a legislature to get this done. So I would ask for a green vote on this. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Wayne. Members, because we're on final reading and about to take a vote, I'll need to ask all of you to please be at your desk pursuant to the rules. Senators, please be at your desk for final reading vote. The question before the body is whether or not to return the bill to select file for a specific amendment. Those in favor vote aye. Those opposed vote nay. Record, please.
44 ayes, no nays on the motion to return.
The bill has been returned to select file. Mr. Clerk.
AM 1941.
Senator Wayne, you're recognized to open on AM 1941.
Thank you, Mr. President. I won't repeat everything I just said again about this amendment, but it is critical from a law enforcement standpoint and from closing this gap and to allowing the Department of Ag the flexibility to implement the current research hemp program and the commercial hemp program down the line. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Wayne. Debate on AM 1941. Senator Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the legislature. For the sake of the process, I can now speak 3 times on Senator Wayne's amendment. He will close and the amendment will be adopted. Then a subsequent motion has to be made to return the bill to final reading. Naturally and obviously, that motion is debatable. So 15 minutes, the first pot, 15 minutes on this, that's 30. 15 additional minutes, that's 45. And then when the bill has been returned, I won't have anything further to do with it. However, if I can find a way to take 45 minutes on a bill that I support, imagine what will happen when we're not on final reading and a bill becomes my sport. See, Senator Hansen, B, I am a sport. I think in that regard, you're just like me. We believe the quarry should have a chance and not just run to the corner and be shot, but join the dance. So I hope you'll sit there and enjoy yourself, because it'll be a while before I put this poem on the shelf. I had pointed out that Governor Director Frakes had a good record when he was in Washington State. He changed the whole concept and use of what's called the whole. And yet when he got here, he made use of what they now euphemistically call restrictive housing with a vengeance. Because you see, my friends, evil companions corrupt good manners. And there were evil people in the Department of Corrections and an evil person sitting as governor, so that nobody will misunderstand whom I am referring to. But to say it correctly and grammatically, Senator Lowe, to whom I am referring, present Governor Ricketts. And Frakes was corrupted, and either he was an actor when he was in Washington State, serving as director of their corrections department, or he came here and fell among thieves and took on their ways. It is more difficult for one person to change a gaggle of thieves than it is for a gaggle of thieves to overcome a weak man's principles, even if he sincerely held them when he was not under pressure. The principles are strong, but the man was weak, and he succumbed. I'll continue at my leisurely pace, because I will have all day today, periodically, maybe spasmodically, to say what I've got to say in my rhyming way. Increased community supervision was for Scott Frakes a logical decision. His philosophy was, a director strives to humanize prison, enhancing the lives of inmates through programs and education, buttressed by counseling and rehabilitation. Frakes was chagrined seeing many who feel cells are not criminal, but mentally ill. In his mind, the saddest songs dealt with the vulnerable victims of wrongs, while much of society had nothing to say, indifferently looking the other way. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Chambers. Senator Lowe.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. From the Hemp Industry Daily, rocky, risky, and untraveled. A global agriculture research firm called hemp farming a risky business based on inconsistent pricing and production data and unstable market. This is something that our farmers want to get into when complaining that their stable markets are too low. It's a risky business, and I warn them. The hemp report warns U.S. farmers. Hemp farming requires more paperwork, and regulatory infractions could result in crop seizures and destruction. That's worse than a hailstone, folks. It's not covered by insurance. And the state can still ban hemp production in the future if we find it a problem. And now you've gone to all that infrastructure, all that cost. The United States may force an oversupply of hemp grown for CBD extraction, causing losses for farmers once prices adjust. Is that much different than our corn prices and our soybean prices? Let's take a second thought about hemp production, people. From the magazine Technician. It's a student newspaper in North Carolina State University. NORML seeks to normalize industrial hemp and marijuana in North Carolina. NORML is the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. According to Sam O'Connor, Sam O'Connor is the president for NORML at NC State. There are a lot of misunderstandings about the similarities and differences among hemp and cannabis and marijuana. Marijuana and hemp are the same plant. Federally, if the plant contains more than 0.3% THC, it's classified as marijuana. So let's not talk about two different plants. These are the same plants, only hemp is the marijuana that we knew in the 60s and 70s. It is the same plant. NORML is committed to the full legalization of hemp and marijuana for industrial, medical and recreational use. From the president of NORML, there is definitely a progressive to things, Connor said. Industrial is usually first, then medical, then recreational. That is how things have gone in other states and kind of how the federal government does it. So let's not think that this is not a slippery slope, folks. It is. We're legalizing what we used to call marijuana here. That's what we are doing. We are legalizing what we now call ditchweed, but we called it marijuana in the past. Now, it's been said that nobody smokes ditchweed. Bethany Gomez, who analyzes the hemp industry for Brightfield Group, a Chicago-based cannabis marketers research firm, said her team uncovered the smokable hemp trend this year while calling retailers, including smoke shops, spas, and natural food stores.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. To find out what they were selling. The people kept saying they're carrying pre-rolls, and we said, what, like marijuana pre-rolls? And sure enough, they're selling pre-rolls of hemp, she said. We identified it as one of the fastest growing segments of the CBD market this year. It's a trend that is still very much developing, so it's hard to tell whether it's a long-term play. Hemp producers say the trend is giving them new market opportunity. CBD product that doesn't require extraction makes it less expensive product to make, as you have room to dry the flower. We had some plants with great flowers, and we thought we'd give it a try, just selling them like that. The head of National Minority Farmers of Industrial Hemp said, it's been a great product for us, so let's not say people aren't smoking hemp. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Lowe. Senator Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the legislature, you're given a choice this morning, as you are all through your life. You can listen to my colleagues drone on and be repetitive, or you can listen to this scintillating rhyme. Continuing. And I need to bring us up to speed on this. Scott Frakes is so harshly criticized by me because I'm aware of what he was or pretended to be before he came to Nebraska, and I wish he'd gone to Alaska. But anyway, continuing. Judging his overall record, one can declare that Scott Frakes was an honorable man. And honorable he was before he fell. The rest of the story, the facts will tell. An ancient axiom of law has been, who aids and abets a wrong shares the sin. The rest of the story recounts the fall of Scott Frakes, who heeded the siren call of Governor Ricketts, who rabidly strives by any means possible to take the lives of some men encaged for what they have done, while others who did the same / worse live on. Multiple homicides by the same hand, disbelief, anger, and outrage they fanned, stabbings and tortures and strangulations, vicious bludgeonings and mutilations, corpses cut up in pieces and hidden, most heinous crimes by the death law forbidden. Such murder cruel and foul persists, even while the death penalty exists. Murder by hundreds, and yet such crime fetches sentence of death for a handful of wretches. Randomly chosen, whose are the voices raised to decide all death penalty choices? 93 counties comprise this great state. Each has one person deciding what fate killers within his / her jurisdiction possibly faces with little restriction, placing a limit on her / his discretion, allowing such choices to give free expression to prejudice, whim, or community fury, leaving scant work for a judge or a jury. Powerful voices, unfettered are these, manipulating the law as they please. None is empowered to spay or neuter the dogs of death called the prosecutor. 93 prosecutors, that is the cause why there are 93 death penalty laws. This factor also produces the key why death cases lack uniformity. 93 prosecutors, 93 laws. Prosecutors manipulate death's jaws. Many are lazy, some weak in the knees. Therefore, most murders are handled by pleas, P-L-E-A-S. Apparently, murders most heinous and cruel are rendered less so per the plea bargain rule. None but the young, poor, unpopular go to languish for decades on hatred's death row. As sure as cattle provide T-bone steaks, all of these facts are familiar to Frakes. Nevertheless, he has thrown in his lot with Governor Ricketts and thickens the plot. There is scant doubt, if the whole truth be told, that Scott Frakes of old would have stood tall and bold and said without flinching or watering eyes, all of my life and works would be lies. Were I to buckle and follow your way, I cannot serve you, no matter the pay. Recall what was writ in the previous space about cash that rich men wave in the face of men not accustomed to status or place. Scott Frakes, alas, is a prototype case. To a reprehensible cause he does fetter himself, though his record proves he knows better. When one spins into moral decline, the honorable thing to do is resign. If Frakes concurred, it is well understood. Still he would stay, for the pay is too good. $112,000 his former job paid. What Ricketts wave put that amount in the shade. $180,000,
Nice time,
much
Senator.
more. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Chambers. Senator Urban.
Thank you, excuse me, thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Senator Lowe, listened to your comments, and as I look around, there were probably 2, maybe 3 of us listening, maybe 4. But one of the things that we don't talk about is how much hemp does one have to raise to have a saturation of the market? How much hemp does one have to raise before it becomes a commodity, like corn or wheat? And as you noticed, those who watch the markets, the corn price has gone up. The reason the corn price is going up because they can't plant corn because it's too wet. Doesn't mean there's going to be more revenue for the farmers. It just means the crop's going to be higher priced. But you'll have less production. So nothing's changed. So they always say the cure for low prices is low prices, and the same is true, the cure for high prices is high prices. But in the hemp discussion, as with all these specialty commodities, specialty crops, it doesn't take a lot of production increase to make a huge difference in the price. And we're waiting out there in rural Nebraska to raise hemp to save the farm. And by the time we get this established, if it does establish itself to be a commodity that produces income, a profit, these farmers that are struggling now because of their property tax may very well be gone. So this is a pie in the sky type operation, but it sounds good, it makes you feel good, and we make a lot of decisions here based on emotions. And I shared with you yesterday that probably the best decision I ever made based on emotion was choosing my wife and getting married to her. After that, basing your decisions on emotion get pretty iffy. And so consequently, I'm not sure that this bill is going to be the salvation for anybody's farm, but we're going to give them some hope that it is. Senator Lowe had described to you the fallacies of raising hemp and what it can lead to, and I believe that to be the exact case. It's the first opening the door to whatever else they want to do with marijuana. We will be here a long time again today. We were here until 9 last night, but we won't be here next Tuesday and Wednesday. Perhaps, this is just a suggestion, perhaps if we had scheduled next Tuesday and Wednesday, we wouldn't have to be here till 11 o'clock. Just saying. But whatever the time is that we need to be here, I'll be here. And if it's next Tuesday or Wednesday, I'll be here as well. But I've not changed my opinion on this hemp bill. And I'm still in opposition. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Senator Irvin. Senator Lowe.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. I just want people to take a moment to think about our children once again and what could happen. This bill says industrial hemp, but it really only says it in the old language. It's not changed. There's nothing new in here. This bill will allow hemp from 2 feet tall to 18 feet tall, all different kinds. The true industrial hemp grows to 18 feet tall. It's going to require new combines, new tractors, new ways to plant it, new cost to these farmers. And when the market gets saturated, because we're now growing it across the United States and it's not a food product, it's a drug product and it's a fiber product. And when that market gets saturated, our farmers are going to have that equipment and they're going to want to use it. Now, the stuff that grows that can harvest the short marijuana can probably be turned into something else, like harvesting of marijuana. The stuff that cuts the 18 feet tall, it doesn't really do much for anything else unless we start growing cane sugar around here, and that's not going to happen, but it could. You put enough incentive behind it and you can grow anything. You can grow palm trees in Nebraska if you put a building around it. And these quotes I'm reading from today, they're not from some right-wing magazine or newspapers, but they're from the Industrial Hemp Daily. And my next one will be from the Rolling Stone magazine. In November 29 of 1918, there was an article, and it said, Aspen Valley, CB flower has gone mainstream. As they stood above Mexico City on a 17,000-foot volcano, the owners of Pure CBD Exchange decided to go all in on the CBD flower by launching Aspen Valley Hemp Company. While products being made of hemp extracts are here to stay, Aspen Valley Hemp Company is willing to bet the whole plant experience on CBD flower, the next revolution on how consumers use CBD products. Aspen Valley's goal was to create a hemp cigarette that would replace tobacco, and it has become clear after some initial experimentation that a filtered hemp cigarette could do exactly that. Hemp cigarettes do not contain tobacco, but instead replicate the experience of smoking. However, it has begun to sink in that the CBD flower is much more than the replacement of tobacco. Aspen Valley has made their mission to breed premium flower that looks, smells exactly like cannabis strain, the marijuana. Due to years of work in breeding and genetics, hemp flower is now able to yield terpene and trichrome covered strains. Terpenes and trichromes are the aromatic compounds that give cannabis its unique fragrance that smoke just like medical dispensary flower. The result is a product substantially higher CBD content and almost no THC whatsoever, less than 0.3%. Why are people smoking hemp? In order to understand this question, you need to understand the difference between industrial hemp, CBD-rich hemp, and typical cannabis. Most cannabis strains are high in THC, comprised of dense buds. These strains have a wide array of cannabinoids and are covered in terpenes and trichomes and give the rich flavor and potency. True industrial hemp looks a lot more like the bamboo plant, and it can reach 18 feet tall and yields very few buds. That is industrial hemp. the 18 feet tall kind. Not the 2 feet or the 4 foot kind, not the 6 foot kind, but the 18-foot tall plant. And that's not what we're talking about growing in Nebraska with this bill. We're not talking about the 18-foot tall plant, and that is where we get the fibers. The CBD flower grown in the United States is a hybrid of the 18-foot tall plant and the cannabis plant.
That's time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Lowe. Senator Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've got to start at a point where what follows will connect. If Frakes concurred, it is well understood. Still he would stay, for the pay is too good. $112,000 his former job paid. What Ricketts waived put that amount in the shade. $180,000, much more than Frakes ever earned or this state paid before. To fill this slot and consider this truth, 50% more than his predecessor forsooth. Who would expect in these cynical days a man to forsake a job which so well pays? Some men would turn their back on their brother, others would dance on the grave of their mother. Just as the honeybee risks all for honey, some men there be who will sell soul for money. Thus is established, as sure as owls hoot, the love of money does comprise evil's root. Sometimes a rhymester resorts to digression in order to give certain ideas expression. When his/her rhyming bones back in its joint, digression ends and rhymester's back on point. To what does this overworked word soul refer? Let me be frank, I do not know for sure. Is it one's essence or what one believes? Is it internal or worn on one's sleeves? Whatever is meant by that mystical term, each for herself or himself must affirm. As to my purpose here, let it be known, I leave soul's meaning to each his/her own. What doth it profit, quoth Jesus of old, to gain the whole world at the cost of one's soul? Taxpayers justly may ponder the why. Ricketts paid Frakes so much. Was it to buy something the governor did not disclose? People may speculate, wonder, suppose. The answer lies somewhere twixt heaven and earth. 'Twas more than Washington thought he was worth. Investment was how Ricketts labeled Frakes' pay. Unclear precisely what he meant to say. One who invests does so with the intent, profit or interest to gain from cash spent. Investors have future advantage in mind. They never invest to be charitable or kind. One may assume rich man Ricketts, a student of capitalism, invests in a way wise and prudent. As any capitalist student would know, in order to capitalist goals to be true, which means not $1 would he waste or spurn, but rather for each buck expect a return. He could have hired one, the equal of Frakes, to just run the prisons, but much higher stakes Ricketts did contemplate, for his true goal was not buying competence, but rather a soul. Extra cash spent, something extra must acquire. Lock, stock, and barrel was Ricketts' desire. Frakes was the target he had in his sight. Events prove that Ricketts has sized Frakes up right. Frakes was the handle that fit Ricketts' tool, making him kin to the vulture and ghoul. Foulness invaded Frakes' heart and his breath, so to speak, he became the minion of death. Ricketts' obsession Scott Frakes did not shirk, helping to execute death's grisly work. Part 6. If the death penalty is not abolished, respect for human life will be demolished. This Pope Francis solemnly declared, even the life of the worst must be spared. Quote, I'm convinced that this way is the best, unquote, the Pope said when the Congress he addressed. All should treat others as they would be treated. By loud applauding, his comment was greeted. Each life is sacred, with dignity endowed. State killing, therefore, should not be allowed. Here was a man of moral authority who made protecting all life a priority. Some will accede and accept his presentment, unlike Pete Ricketts, who harbors resentment. Frakes made a choice.
That's time, Senator Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Chambers. Senator Blood. Senator Blood, before you proceed, Senator Chambers, that was your third opportunity. Senator Blood.
Thank you, Mr. President. Fellow senators, friends all, I stand in full support of both Senator Wayne's amendment and his bill. And I want to tell you why, because I think that by supporting this bill, we're being good Americans. And let me tell you why. Does anybody know what type of paper the Declaration of Independence was written on? For those of you that guessed hemp paper, you were absolutely right, Senator Kavanaugh. 2 points for you. Thank you for playing, by the way. But seriously, I don't know how many times we had to stand on this mic and talk and debunk silly science with facts. Hemp has been produced around the world for centuries. It's used to create products, treat health issues. CBD is derived from the hemp and really has no psychoactive effects. We're not reinventing the wheel. Senator Wayne has been very diligent. But one of the main reasons I support this is the reason that this was made a criminal thing was really because of racism. And a lot of people don't understand that. And I think this is an opportunity for us to do better than what our forefathers did. So there was a gentleman named DuPont, and if that name sounds familiar, it's because DuPont was known for pesticides and herbicides and fertilizers, right? And he was in the time of when the rich were very rich. And he was very good friends with William Hearst, who owned a huge media kingdom. And so what they knew back then is that cotton was really super cheap to grow and was very dependent on pesticides, herbicides, and fertilizers. And then people of color found out, as did other farmers such as in Kansas, that it was even cheaper to raise hemp and require fewer chemicals. And so Mr. DuPont went off the rails and ganged up together with Mr. Hearst. And they started this huge racist campaign that scared people about minorities and scared people about hemp and marijuana. And so I feel that when we continue to support this sad legacy, we continue to say that we don't care about the history of minorities, that it doesn't apply to us. We're fine, we're not racist. But I think that when we don't go ahead and override these past views that are based on obvious racism, that we have no room to talk. And so, since Senator Lowe continues to talk about this as if it is a drug, I think this is a really good time to point out that this morning on the news that Senator Howard was mentioned, her name not exactly, but her efforts in preventing Nebraska's opioid crisis. She started the efforts with LB 237, there was LB 1072, 471, 223, 390, 457, 6 more bills last year. And I think today, when we're talking about pretend drugs, we should remember that we have somebody in the body and others who supported her who did a fine job of keeping opiates out of Nebraska and protecting our citizens. With that, I would ask that Senator Lowe yield to a question.
Senator Lowe, would you yield, please?
Yes,
How are you today, Senator Lowe?
I'm well.
I'm glad to hear it. It was nice meeting your son yesterday. So at 9:17 a.m. and at 9:57 a.m. today, you expressed concern for the children and asked us to think about the children. Would you say that's correct?
I don't know the times, but probably correct.
Okay, according to my notes, 9:17 and 9:57, because I do pay close attention to everything you say, and I appreciate the fact when you are on the floor. So knowing that, I have a question for you. Would you say that breastfeeding a child is pro-woman and pro-science?
What was that?
Would you say that breastfeeding a child is pro-woman and pro-science?
I don't know if it's pro-science or not,
Why would you say you're not sure if it's pro-science, sir?
because I don't know if it's pro-science or not.
Okay, would you say that a healthy child being provided good nutrition is good science?
I would say providing a child with good food is good science.
Okay, then we would be in agreement with that point. Well done. I ask you that because we're going to be discussing it later on today in an amendment that I'm going to be bringing up. I know that you are one of the people that supports a bill that we have on at the end of the day on the agenda 209, I believe. You're a supporter of that?
That's time, Senator.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Blood.
I
Senator
don't
Lowe.
remember my 1 minute.
Senator Erdman.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. I appreciate that. I'm quite confident that Senator Chambers probably has not used up all of his information that he'd like to share with us. So I'm going to yield my time to Senator Chambers.
Thanks, Senator Erdman. Senator Chambers, 4 minutes 45.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the legislature. I always knew Senator Erdman was a gentleman, but now I know that he's also a scholar and a master of the arts, and he is appreciative of that which is artistic. Art is in the eye of the beholder in terms of its quality. And they say, Shelley might have been the one who said it, beauty is its own reason for being. This that I'm reciting is not beautiful. I'll pick up where I left off. Here was a man speaking of the Pope, of moral authority, who made protecting all life a priority. Some will accede and accept his presentment, unlike Pete Ricketts, who harbors resentment. Frakes made a choice. He aided, abetted. Ricketts' perverse cause, will he regret it? If he has principles left, he will find nothing brings torment like a divided mind. Derisively, Ricketts deems himself exempt from the Pope's words, which fill him with contempt. He's not averse to all the Pope does say, only such tenets that get in his way, complicating purposes, all of which are so important to all the spoiled rich. Also politicians. The Pope fails to see he's in religion and politics are we. He can direct religious waters flow, politicals move as political winds blow. If we don't please irate voters, they shout, throw the bums out, throw the bad word, bums out. I didn't write a bad word. I put those symbols that the typewriter lets you put in to indicate that somebody's speaking in Christian terms. The Pope is immune from voters' retribution. Politics is no friendly institution. All due respect, let the Pope go back home and tend the church's onions over there in Rome. Scott Frakes and I, with the help from the AG, shall have executions. That's our guarantee. Sometimes this is Ricketts being presented. That's our guarantee. Sometimes, and the Lieutenant Governor knows this, he used to be against the death penalty till Ricketts brought him aboard. And I touched on earlier where Jesus said, what doth it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul? But to gain a seat in the legislature as the Lieutenant Governor? Good God Almighty. Let me continue. Scott Frakes and I, with the help from the AG, shall have executions. That's our guarantee. Sometimes I'm overcome by tingly thrill when I contemplate our power to kill. Killing to some is unpleasant, that's true, but killing the public expects us to do. Frakes knew no glee, but he told Ricketts, fine. Eerie, weird feelings played tag down his spine. The governor, by thoughts of killing, was buoyed. The death-bringer's role he thoroughly enjoyed. Some think he ought to pursue meditation. Others think he should be on medication. One thing is clear, he is bound by the spell of killing. Where it shall lead,
1 minute.
time will tell. It is one thing to pursue such a course, and quite another to feel no remorse. It is one thing to discharge ghastly duty, and quite another to see in it beauty. If one concedes such a duty is his, ghoulishly he reveals just what he is. And I'll pause until next time. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Chambers. Senator Lowe.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. You get the same taste, the same psychological feeling of smoking a joint, but without the high, by smoking a hemp cigarette. Also missing from the smoking hemp is any regulation or testing requirements that come along with tobacco and marijuana products. Which means there's no regulation, folks. We're not ready for this. We're not ready for this at all. Do you want your kids doing this? Do you want your grandkids smoking hemp because they can get it? There's no regulation. It's a voluntary decision for many of them, for many of the places that sell the smoking hemp, not to sell to people under 18, but it's voluntary because there is no regulation on smoking hemp. I once again say that this is a slippery slope and we are ready to slide. We're going to give the first push here in a few minutes. The hemp bill is a Trojan horse bill for marijuana, for medical marijuana, because once we get it, then we're going to go straight to marijuana. And I still say that this hemp is still the hemp that everybody was smoking in the 60s and 70s. It's just that through GMOs, which a lot of people don't like to hear about, but through GMOs has made marijuana stronger than ever. And if we were going to do this for paper, we're going to save a lot of trees because we also use papyrus. We're not using papyrus too much anymore, except on very expensive paper. And once we pass this, is the testing for federal jobs going to know the difference between the CBD and the THC? Because yes, there is THC in hemp. So when you take your job to work at a federal position, are you going to test positive for marijuana? If so, you will lose your job. We are one of 3 states now that don't have hemp and don't have marijuana. We could stand on gaining a lot of federal positions here in this state, federal contracts, because our people will not test positive, a lot of our people. I would rather see these contracts come to a state that is strong and that stands for what is right. Big Marijuana's game plan has 3 steps. First, to legalize hemp. Then legalize so-called medical marijuana. And then legalize recreational marijuana. And Colorado has taken it a step further now to legalize mushrooms. I am convinced that the real purpose of this bill is not to help farmers or to provide raw materials for clothing or industrial purposes. Thank you, Mr. President. The real purpose of this bill is to lay the groundwork for legalizing marijuana. So folks, I don't know if I'll get another chance to speak, but if you don't like Big Pharma, don't vote for this bill. If you don't like GMOs, don't vote for this bill. If you don't like the overreaching tobacco companies, don't vote for this bill. If you don't like government control on how you grow your crops or where to grow your crops, don't vote for this bill. If you don't want your children or grandchildren getting easy access drugs, because that's what this is, don't vote for this bill. If you want our state to go on a slippery slope, vote for this bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Lowe. Before proceeding, Senator Arch would like to recognize some guests today. We have with us 68 fourth graders from the Portal Elementary School in La Vista, Nebraska, under the North Balcony, as well as up in the North Balcony. Could those students please rise so we can welcome you to the Nebraska Legislature? Continuing discussion, Senator Erdman.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Senator Lowe, thank you for the information that you shared with us. As with most proposals that come to the floor, I would assume that we're not changing anyone's mind, anyone's vote, especially today, Senator Lowe, we had like 2 people listening when you were speaking. I guess that's what we do here. But you made good points, and if people were listening, they would be able to make a conscientious decision about how to move forward with this proposal. So we're about to the end of it. The amendment will be adopted, and then 657 will pass, and then we'll be able to understand exactly what this is going to do for people, and we'll keep track of that. And we'll go back and review it. We seldom do a review of what we do here, but we will do that. So, Senator Lowe, thank you for your efforts. I appreciate it, and I will be a no on 657. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Erdman. Senator Wayne, you recognize close on your amendment.
Colleagues, I'm going to ask for your green support on this amendment and the underlying bill. Let me be clear here. If we don't pass this bill, I want you to know that most of their farmers in Nebraska are committing felonies, because hemp is currently illegal even if it's wild, and they are currently in possession of it in their creeks. If you say creek, you can call it a creek. I call it a crick. This bill is making sure that farmers aren't being prosecuted for wild-grown hemp, that we are part of a research program to put Nebraska in the forefront of this industry. All the other things that we talked about or I heard about, I didn't respond to because they're not really worth responding at this point. We are closing a loophole with this amendment that currently exists that our prosecutors are facing. We are opening up an industry that allows us to move to the forefront, and it's time that Nebraska gets involved in this commodity or this agricultural product. Now, whether the market gets saturated or not, that is a business decision that farmers should be able to make and do make every time they decide to plant something and not plant something. And I believe that they can make that decision, and this is just one more agriculture product. We are opening up the door for them to grow. This is not, Senator Erdman, designed to save the family farm. This is to give an alternative crop to our farmers. And with that, I would ask for a green vote on the AM 41 and the LB 657. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Wayne. Members, just a reminder, we are on final reading. We're going to be taking a vote. All senators, please be at your desk for final reading vote. Question before the body is the adoption of AM 1941. Those in favor vote aye. Those opposed vote nay. Record, please.
44 ayes, 2 nays on the adoption of the select file amendment.
AM 1941 is adopted. Anything further on the bill, Mr. Clerk?
Nothing further, Mr. President.
Senator Slama for motion.
Mr. President, I move that LB 657 be advanced to now for engrossing.
The motion is to advance the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say nay. LB 657 advances. LB 657A, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, Senator Wayne would move to return LB 657A to select file for consideration of AM 1883.
Senator Wayne, you're recognized to open on your motion to return the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm asking to return this bill because as we made the change in the bill we just passed, it allows for more flexibility through cash funds that the department already has and allows them to use their noxious weed, individuals who work in the noxious weed sector to be able to do other things. This A bill will just simply line up with that and removes the general impact fund so this bill can move forward. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. Before you is the motion to return the bill to select file. Debatable. Senator Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm just about wrapped up on this rhyme, and I don't want to impede the movement of Senator Wayne's bill because I support it. Ordinarily, I would digress and counteract some of the arguments that are made against his bill, but in the same way that he didn't see the need to take time to do that, I shall not do so either. I think the bill has merit. It stands on its own feet. He is working in conjunction today with something the Attorney General had concerns about, and that alone should carry it back to final reading where it was anyway. I don't think by him trying to cooperate with the Attorney General should put his bill in jeopardy, and I do not think that will happen. I'm going to wrap this up, but I'm going to turn on my light just in case I need one more time to finish. This is in the nature of a sermonette. I'm going to mention 7 people who were traitors, and in order not to have to break in to what I'm reading, I will tell you something about them. The first one is Lucifer, and he was called the son of the morning. He was the anointed cherub that covereth. He held the highest rank among the angels, if you accept the yarn. And then he got full of himself, so he decided that being in second place wasn't enough. He's going to take over. Now, this is in heaven where everything's supposed to be good. But that pride was there, and he persuaded a few other angels to go along with him. And I'm sure they sat in the heavenly legislature like here, and they were very malleable and not very strong. So the idea of taking over really appealed to them. And there were some who tried to persuade Lucifer, don't do this. And there was a little conversation between him and God before God showed him who was boss, and Lucifer wound up being kicked out of heaven and came down to a bad place and has been tormenting people ever since. But some people don't see what he does as torment. There was this lady who was going to buy a red dress, and she was a church lady, and she looked at that herself in that red dress, and when a lady, red is a power color for women. It's a monkey color for men, in my opinion. She looked at herself in the mirror and she said, "Good Lord, this dress is beautiful, but it might stoke my vanity, which would be a sin. Satan, get thee behind me." And Satan obliged. And you know what he said? "It looks pretty good from back here too." So she bought the dress. Now that's Lucifer. The next one will be Dorian Gray. He was a character created by Oscar Wilde, and to make that story as brief as I can, there was an artist who painted a picture of Dorian Gray, a young man about town, very handsome. He got into all kinds of things. This portrait that the artist did somehow became enmeshed with the spirit of Dorian Gray. Every time Dorian Gray committed a wrong, it etched a line on that portrait. Then he began to do a lot of wrong because the taste of it was so sweet on his tongue that he couldn't give it up. And the picture became ugly. It became hideous, so hideous that Dorian Gray hid it in his attic. They made a movie about it. Dorian Gray wound up stabbing the picture, and that was how he would purge himself of the evil. The picture gradually came back to what it was, the picture of a fresh-faced, innocent young man, and Dorian Gray himself became that hideous monster, full of bumps and carbuncles and festering sores. And I'll continue when I'm recognized the next time. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Chambers. You may continue in a second opportunity.
That takes care of Dorian Gray. Quisling, Witzthum Quisling, betrayed his country to Hitler. And he was one of those who suffered a bad fate during the Nuremberg trials. When you hear somebody referred to as a Quisling, that means a traitor. Next was Brutus. Et tu, Brute? Brute said, no, et one, Caesar. That takes a little while. You all don't get Latin jokes. But Brutus turned on Caesar, turned against him. You all have heard of Benedict Arnold. You all ought to read about Benedict Arnold, and you see that he got a bad rap. But Quisling and Benedict Arnold are terms used interchangeably to designate a traitor. Then Faustus. Faustus was a person who gave up everything in order to make a deal with the devil. And Mephistopheles was the one who dealt with Faustus, not Satan himself. And he told Faust, they came together because Faust dealt and dabbled within the arts of evil. And he was able to summon this creature, and he was promised anything he wanted in exchange for his soul. Faustus didn't worry about his soul, and he made the deal. He did things like went to Rome, and he was he thumped the Pope on the head. He was slapping priests upside the head while they were eating dinner, and he had a good time. And then he even saw Helen. Is this the face that launched 1,000 ships, that burnt the towered tops of Ilium? Helen, make me immortal with a kiss. That's what Faustus said when he went back. You know, he could do anything he wanted to. But when time came to pay the piper, Faustus realized what he had done, and he wanted to get out of his deal. But once you make a deal with the devil, you cannot get out. He said, if I could just become a drop of water and be put into the ocean and disappear, if I could make those horses whose movement symbolizes the passage of time, if I could stop those horses in their flight and midnight would never come, but midnight came. And Faustus had some students who almost worshiped him because one of the things he wanted was a lot of knowledge and understanding, which he obtained. He was world famous. So he told these students, whatever you hear in this room, disregard it. Whatever you do, don't enter this room. So Faustus was in the room, and when Mephistopheles came to collect on the debt, the two words that came out of Faustus's mouth, the last two, ah, Mephistopheles. Then he was whisked on away. The last one is Judas, who needs no introduction, so I won't give it. But the three famous traitors, Quisling, a European, Benedict Arnold, an American, Judas, a Jew. How much time do I have, Mr. President?
About 1 minute.
I think I'll just wait until I'm recognized the last time so that I can read through what I have in mind. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Chambers. Senator Chambers, you're recognized for your third opportunity.
Thank you. These 4 words, well, 3, literature, history, and Bible. They will sound like plural, but they're really the possessive forms of these words. Part 7, literatures, histories, Bibles, examples. Chronicle, falls. Here are but a few examples. Lucifer, Dorian Gray, Quisling, Brutus, Benedict Arnold, and Faustus and Judas. All of them, one way or another, were fakes. Sitting at table now with them is Frakes. Jesus did speak of the world for one soul. Is it a plausible trade as a goal? The prize here less consequence has and less worth. A tawdry position engendering mirth is go-to lapdog or flunky fulfilling, serving a rich man spoiled, stuck on killing. The whole world, a most overwhelming of visions, but merely hid of Nebraska's 10 prisons? Frakes, is it worth it? What for you is par? A more spacious house and a snazzier car? Able at others to look down your nose, strutting in shine shoes and fancier clothes? Able to walk the dog sharp as a sport? Some might surmise you sell yourself short. While to his death work your spoiled boss attends, are you ensconced in his circle of friends? While he obsessively handles death biz, are you socializing with him and his? Do you and he pal around, laugh and joke? Perchance at times have a drink and a smoke? Did knights of Exarban perchance to you bring an invitation to serve as their king? Are all such musings hilariously funny? Still just a guard with a little more money? If that is how your spoiled boss perceives you, totally I understand if that grieves you. Merely a guard with a little more money, while next he'll call you Junior or Sonny. Think not that you from his scorn are exempt. After all, towards the Pope he shows contempt. The FDA, Food and Drug Administration, assigned to oversee the importation into the U.S. of medicines and drugs, cannot be thwarted with dismissive shrugs. A headline in the state's leading paper trumpeted the governor's long Looney Tunes caper, aimed at skirting the FDA's banning of lethal injection drugs import by planning to pit in his silliness the DEA against the FDA, paving the way to have the DEA nullify or stall the ban on sodium thiopental, which by law the state must administer in executions. His plot would be sinister were it not patently preposterous and thick-headed as a rhinoceros. He, being wealthy, is confident that federal law to his will can be bent. Arrogance, ignorance, delusion it takes to hold such a view. He ordered Scott Frakes to help him skirt the FDA rules, booking his passage on Rick's ship of fools. Part 9. Into a cesspool Scott Frakes has been hurled, a shadowy, lawless, gross drug underworld.
1 minute.
Skulking and slithering as do loathsome bugs, trying to garner illegal death drugs. Sinking so low, Frakes inspires startle all, scrambling to circumvent federal law. Federal law, as he must understand, holds lofty status as the law of the land. I'll stop at this point. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Chambers. Senator Wayne, you recognize to close on your motion to return the bill.
Thank you, colleagues. Again, we're returning the bill to allow the A bill to catch up or make the same changes that we just made in the underlining bill of LB 657. I'd appreciate a green vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. Members, once again, we're on final reading. Please be at your desk for a vote. Question before the body is return the bill to select file for a specific amendment. Those in favor vote aye. Those opposed vote nay. Have you all voted care to? Record, please.
42 ayes, no nays to return.
The bill has been returned to select file. Senator Wayne, you're recognized to open on AM 1883.
Obviously, I'm new to this process because I keep making an argument. Thank you, Mr. President. I keep making the argument about the amendment on the motion, and so I'm not going to repeat what I said again, but this is just allow the A bill to catch up with the underlying bill that we just moved a little bit ago. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. I see no discussion on the amendment. Senator Wayne, waves closed. And question for the body's adoption of AM 1883. Those in favor vote aye. Those opposed vote nay. Record, please.
44 ayes, 4 nays on adoption of the select file amendment.
AM 1883 is adopted. Senator Slama for a motion.
Mr. President, I move that LB 657A be advanced to DNR for engrossing.
Motion is to advance the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say nay. LB 657A advances. Items for the record, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Announcement, first of all, the Health Committee will have an executive session in room 2022 now. Health Committee in room 2022 now. Study resolution, Senator Kolowski has LR 225. That'll be laid over. But study resolutions 226 through 231. Amendments to be printed, Senator Slama to 183. That's all that I have, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Per the agenda, we'll move to general file. Speaker Major Proposal, LB 720. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, LB 720 is a bill that has been considered. It's offered by Senator Coulterman and others. It's a bill for an act relating to revenue and taxation, adopts an Imagine Nebraska Act. Senator Coulterman presented his bill on May 15. Committee amendments were presented by the Revenue Committee, chaired by Senator Linehan. When the legislature left the issue, there was a Bowles pending amendment. Pursuant to the Speaker's order, with respect to this being a major proposal, the Bowles amendment is the first item for consideration, AM 1795.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Coulterman and Senator Bowles, if you'd like 2 minutes each to refresh us on where we left off, then we'll proceed to debate on the amendment. There's a long list of senators in the queue. Senator Coulterman.
Good morning, colleagues. Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. This is it's a bill that needs to advance. Since 1987, Nebraska's had what's an incentive program. Started out at 775, and it's now the Advantage Act. We've created 100,000 new jobs and added $30 billion of capital investments into our state. But it's time to improve on that. You've heard 3 hours of discussion on it. You've heard talk on the amendment. I'm hoping we can get past that and go to the next amendment shortly. The important thing about this bill is it changes who's managing the program from the Department of Revenue to the Department of Economic Development, where we can develop better relationships. The most important aspect of it, as we talked and we looked at the Development Task Force, the Economic Development Task Force from this summer, we identified some principles that had to be addressed. One of them was simplicity, one of them was transparency, one was integrity, and the other was competitiveness. I want everybody to understand that this bill is based on a pay-for-performance model. So in other words, when somebody applies for this incentive, they don't get it until they've earned the credits, or until they've made the investment. With that, I would hope that we can get past general file today. We've been very receptive to making changes. We've got some amendments. We've got another amendment that we need to have heard, and I appreciate your support. The people that have been with me, I really appreciate your investment in this process, and for those that haven't been with me, I would hope that you could open your eyes and take a good look at what we're trying to do here to help our state and all aspects of our state grow. So with that, thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator
Appreciate
Coltman. Before commencing debate, Senator Bowles, if you'd like a couple minutes, you're welcome to it.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, Nebraska faces a severe challenge in terms of workforce development. It has been described as a crisis by University of Nebraska President Hank Bounds and as a 1,000-pound gorilla by Brian Sloan, the president of the Nebraska Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Colleagues, in many ways, this is a placeholder amendment or a planting a flag in terms of saying we have to start paying better attention to workforce development in our state if we are ever to grow our economy. And as we are having a discussion about how we incentivize businesses to grow jobs here, we cannot ignore the fact that we need to also train up skilled workers to fill the jobs that we already have, in addition to those we hope to grow. So AM 1795 is simply a starting point, and colleagues, importantly, does not even fund the customized job training program, but does describe the customized job training program as a tool that we could use in our economic development toolbox to establish the baseline for state investments in customized job training for economic development projects that come to Nebraska, by also incentivizing job training that are based on training in the community college level or result in an industry recognized credential, or otherwise provide real value to the skill set of workers working in economic development projects. Colleagues, I do hope you support AM 1795. It's an important part of this dialogue and conversation. It's my understanding that Senator Coltman would like to move forward with this amendment quickly, and I support and appreciate that. I think that there are significant other challenges related to the fiscal impact and the job quality in 720 as a whole. I look forward to that conversation and dialogue, but do ask for your support for AM 1795. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Bowles. Debate is now open. It'll be 7:20 and the pending amendments. Senator Lathrop.
Thank you, Mr. President and colleagues. Good morning. I support AM 1795. Appreciate this being added as a component to this business tax incentive. I just want to remind the body, this is an important part of the process. That is, general file gives the introducer, in this case Senator Coltman, an opportunity to find out what people's concerns are. This is too important not to move to select file. Whether you have concerns or not, I think it's important that we have a debate that's substantive today and that we have an opportunity for Senator Coltman to make some changes to bring people along. That's what this process is about in general file. And with that, I would encourage your support of AM 1795, LB 720, and I'll yield the balance of my time to Senator Coltman.
Thanks, Senator Lathrop. Senator Coltman, 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor, and thank you, Senator Lathrop. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've done to clarify some aspects of this bill that were of concern to people since the first 3 hours of debate. From day one, I said that this bill was a work in progress. You know, I asked for input from all my colleagues on how we make it a better bill based on the feedback that we got in committee, and we've done some things that I think improve this bill. We put a robust annual review process where the Speaker, the Chair of Revenue, Chair of Appropriations, the Chair of Performance Audit, the Director of DED, the Tax Commissioner, they're going to have to get together once a year and meet and review the approved credits, utilization trends, and anomalies that might come up throughout the year. This is in addition to the annual joint report and hearing from DED and Department of Revenue to the Legislature each year. We got a lot of feedback about the original draft and how it needed to be more accessible to rural and manufacturing. So we modified that growth and expansion category to require creation of 5 full-time equivalents instead of 10. One job in Nebraska, in rural Nebraska, is equal to about 1,000 jobs in the Omaha metropolitan area. So lowering that threshold truly makes the program accessible statewide. To address the concerns about discrimination, we've added a provision that companies must acknowledge they have no policy that violates any state and federal discrimination laws. To ensure we're incentivizing good jobs, we've added a requirement that businesses acknowledge and prove that they offer an affordable care, compliant health insurance to their employees. And finally, many senators looked at LB 605, Senator Lindstrom's bill, to establish a tax credit for biochemicals and felt it was valuable and set Nebraska up for the next generation of ethanol-type development. LB 605 has already been amended. Since the last debate, we've taken a look at the full-time equivalent pooling language. We've worked with Senator Hansen. Appreciate that talk that we've had. And we have an amendment, AM 1934, which you'll hear in a little bit, that addresses that. We've also put sufficient benefit language in that kind of obligates employers to provide a sufficient benefit to employees. We've added a social benefit corporation multiplier, which you'll hear more about when Senator Wishart introduces her amendment. Senator Scheer had an amendment that we talked about. We rolled that into AM 1934, which you're going to hear about shortly. It's called a high impact fund. It allows some discretionary money, a pilot project that would allow small towns to access monies through the Department of Economic Development, say for a small machine shop that wants to open up in the state. We think that's very important. And then we've taken repeal real property tax refund from mega project language. And we made a bunch of technical changes. So I think we've done a good job. I think we need to get past AM 1795. We've talked a lot about that. And we need to support that. We need to create job preparedness. Senator Bowles has done a good job with that amendment. Support it fully, and then we need to move on and get it to AM 1934. Appreciate all your support. Look forward to your questions as we go forward this morning, and hopefully we'll have a good 3 hours of debate and then move this thing to select file. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Coltman. Senator Brandt.
Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. Thank you, Senator Colderman, for bringing this bill, LB 720. 500 years ago, Shakespeare knew we were going to discuss this bill today because he stated, quote, "Let us look at this nothing they have so generously given," unquote. This is how 720 feels to me, like a retread of the Nebraska Advantage Act with a new, sexier name, the Nebraska Imagine Act. This is what I imagine. I imagine that the new bill will not have any hard caps to limit fiscal exposure to state taxpayers. I imagine that the new bill will suck up 3% of all state revenues like the old act. I imagine the governor and the chamber consider the new corporate welfare program to be no new taxes. The same corporations that received a 40% federal reduction in taxes owed on the federal side. Most people did not get a 40% tax break. Did you know that on some levels of the current act, business does not even submit state withholding taxes taken from employees, but is allowed to keep them? Would we all not like to have that sweetheart deal? We need to shorten up the payout period by half over the current act. Any revenues required by the new program need to go through the budget, not around it, as happens today. Why does the Imagine Act not have to raise its own revenue streams like the Property Tax Relief Act had to? If we want to target business relief so badly, then we should be willing to give in order to get. How about we start with repealing the S-Corp LLC exclusion? The $82 million raised could be put toward the Imagine Act. This is an exclusion put in place over 30 years ago when the state was desperately trying to retain ConAgra. We all know how that turned out. ConAgra is gone, but we give away big money every year on the cost of the exclusion. Senators, ask yourself these questions. The Chamber of Commerce does not support property tax relief through the elimination of sales tax exemptions, but does support using tax dollars for this. Why do we recruit businesses to relocate in Nebraska to compete against businesses already based here? Why is this so heavily targeted toward recruitment when businesses across the state are asking for workforce development? Why is this so heavily targeted toward urban areas when we need to develop rural areas of the state? I am a farmer, a small business owner. 720 does not help farmers or small business in any meaningful way. Agriculture is our state's biggest industry, and the largest employer in the state is every business that employs 1 or 2 people in the aggregate. Imagine a program that actually helps agriculture and small business. We've had a lot of discussion this session about TIF. TIF has nothing on the giveaway this program represents. If you hate TIF, you'd better be voting against 720 in this form. What is the rush on 720? We could use the interim to get this right. I understand there are 19 pending amendments. There is no way we will even be able to consider 1 or 2 today, let alone 19. We as the legislature only get a chance to review these programs every 5 or 10 years, so let us get it right. Let us go slow and get input from all stakeholders across the state and bring a strong bill back in this short session. My emails from constituents predominantly say fix the property tax problem and stop business incentives. I am talking to those listening to this debate outside of this chamber. If you feel the same as I do, then contact your senators. Tell them to please not rush to a cloture vote. There is no need. We can fix this. We can deliver to the people what they want: tax relief and fiscal responsibility.
1 minute.
We need to stop this on general file because there is no time left this year to fix this on select. There is no fire, no make-believe urgency. Imagine bringing a program that helps the entire business community in the state. I can imagine it, and will work hard over the interim with the chamber to make it so. This is the painful truth. It will take another 10 years just to pay off our existing obligations for 775 and the Advantage Act, costing state taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars. Money that could be used for K-12 education, the best workforce development dollars spent in the budget. I do not want to burn this down. I want to make a great incentive program for all businesses in the state. And with that, I urge you to vote red on cloture. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Brandt. Senator Ben Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I think I have a little bit of explaining to do, maybe myself personally, about why I took my name off of 720. I've had a lot of questions about why I did, what was the reasoning behind what I did. Being on the Business and Labor Committee and myself owning 3 businesses, tax incentives and business incentives are kind of close to heart with me. So some of the reasons that I did take my name off of 720 was whenever I put my name on a bill, I'm not a big fan of it being kind of a moving target with amendments being added to it and changing and evolving. I want to make sure that it's a stable bill that my name can be behind and I'm 100% behind. Also, which I think has been addressed to some extent, is with this incentive program, I would like to see it be targeted more towards smaller businesses. I don't think the government's very good at picking winners and losers, and I'd like to see incentives being offered to everybody of every size. I understand the constraints that we're working under with the amount of money that we can use for incentives. So I do applaud the fact that 720 has reduced the FTEs from 10 to 5 for the lowest. I think it could be lower, but I also understand again how much money we're dealing with and what we can use. So, and I was thinking a little bit more about business tax incentives and whether they're needed or not even. I would personally like to see the overall tax rate for businesses be reduced as opposed to incentives, but I also view and understand that tax incentives are a little bit of a necessary evil. We have to be competitive, just like any other business has to be competitive with the businesses around it. And many businesses look to see if states have tax incentive programs before they consider whether or not to expand in that state. I think a good analogy that was used for tax incentives is, most people have heard of doorbusters or have heard of enticements to get people into their business at first, whether that's 50% off your first purchase. And I think that's how I kind of view tax incentives to some extent. It's getting people to look at our state, to come to our state through an incentive, and then it's our job as a state to impress them. It's our job as a state to get them to stay here by the people, by our overall tax structure, by anything else that we can offer them, our culture, in Nebraska. That's unique, I think. And so I think that's where tax incentives come in handy. And like many Nebraskans, I'm a business owner, and like I said, I own 3 small businesses. And I do like that we did lower the amount of FTEs from 10 down to 5. But any business like mine, most small businesses, hiring 5 FTEs or investing $1 million is pretty unrecognizable. That's not going to happen. And so it doesn't help any businesses like myself. Another thing that LB 720 is not, it's not as targeted as I like to see. We talk a lot about workforce development and out-migration in this body. So what does LB 720 do to retain workers in the state? Do you know what the best way to attract businesses to Nebraska is? To have the workforce necessary to effectively and efficiently conduct business, this program has much more room to be people-focused instead of business-focused. If we target the impact of the program to the people, developing and retaining highly skilled, highly trained workers in the state, new businesses will come, current businesses will stay, and entrepreneurs will rise from the ranks. I like to see incentive programs incentivize the people that we're hiring. I was recently told of a company right here in Lincoln that was looking to expand its workforce. This is a business that is already located in Nebraska. When the company interviewed highly skilled workers from around the country, none were willing to come here. So what did that company do? It expanded out of state. This prosperous and growing company in the same city as the University of Nebraska-Lincoln could not find enough workers in the state and could not find enough workers to come here, and it was forced to expand out of state. I think it's a growing problem we have to look at more than anything else. People want to come to our state, businesses want to come to our state, but they can't find people to work here. These are the type of businesses we should be focused on. These are the people we should be fixing. These are the problems we should be fixing. Didn't sound very good. This business incentive program should be targeted towards small businesses in the state to help them grow by incentivizing them to invest in people. Do you want to grow the tax base? Grow the state. This is the best way to do it. Right now, the conversation about previous tax business plans is how to minimize the damage they've done to Nebraskans, and we have the opportunity to flip that conversation around and bring a plan that actually helps Nebraska become more prosperous. Let's do that. So finally, in conclusion, I am going to vote green on LB 720.
It's time, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Senator Urban.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. A little confused by Senator Hansen's comments there, but that's okay. As you know, last week when we debated this, I had a bracket motion on this bill, and it would have still been there had the Speaker not made it a major proposal. So we've tried this twice. We've done this twice, LB 775 and 87. And there's $300 million outstanding in earned income tax credits there. We did it again in 05, Nebraska Advantage Act. There's $490 million unclaimed credits there. We don't take that into consideration. We never consider that. So I was wondering if Senator Stinner could help me understand something if he'd answer a question.
Senator Stinner, would you yield, please?
Yes, I will.
Senator Stinner, thank you for that. So, Senator, you're the resident expert on budgeting. So tell me, at what point in time do we account for the $800 million that's outstanding on earned income tax credits that are outstanding?
It comes in over a period of time, and I believe the Nebraska Advantage Act will come in over at least 20 years, maybe 25 years of time. It has a fairly long tail, and 720 actually moves that back to a 15 years, so we don't have that long tail on the incentive program.
Okay, so my understanding is they've earned these credits already, is that correct?
Yes, they have. Whether they turn them in or not, it's been about 80%, so the $480 million you're talking about, take it times 80%, and that's probably what will end up paying out.
Okay, tell me why they haven't claimed these, if you know.
You know, a lot of it has to do with the jobs and job retention requirements in it. Some of it has to do with other requirements that they may have put in place initially and then didn't comply with, so there's there's a reduction. I know two different situations where they actually didn't employ as many people as what they said they would, and so that earned tax credit that they actually put their application in did not come about.
So could one other issue come into play? They haven't made enough money to use them. Would that be possible?
Well, they probably didn't put enough jobs in place.
What about just haven't earned enough income to offset it?
Nothing in the Nebraska Advantage Act has to do with earnings. It has to do with jobs and capital improvements.
So why in the forecasting board's analysis of what the revenue is going to be, do they not ever take into consideration how much revenue they may lose because of the Nebraska Advantage Act and 775?
No, it is in there.
It is?
It definitely is in there, yes.
Oh. That's not the information that I had received. Okay, thank you.
I might have to correct myself on that. I'll go check it, but what I follow is what the projected income is against budget, and then I take a look at the projection for refunds against budget. So
my understanding was that's never a conversation that they have, but I could be wrong. So when we look at the incentives and the impacts they make on locations being chosen because of incentives, studies have shown that from 2 to 25% of the firms decide where to go because of tax incentives. So that means 75% of those firms make that decision irregardless of the incentive programs that are in place. So overly investing in incentive tax breaks pulls away revenue from services like education and job training. And also, it takes away the wage growth in the community. So these incentive programs have not been shown to do exactly what they think they're going to do. And we have no evidence that, besides a few specific incidents where they help, that that's important. I thought Senator Brandt did a fine job explaining why he was opposed to this bill. I've not changed my opinion since last week. This is something that needs to go away. These incentives are taking tax dollars to incentivize businesses that leave us anyway. And I believe Senator Brandt spoke about ConAgra. We did that because of ConAgra. We did the Nebraska Advantage Act. And so we continue to do things that we've always done in the past, and then we get the same results and we go, can you believe that?
That's time, Senator.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Urban. Senator Coltman.
thank you very much, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. Since we're going to be on this amendment for a while, I'm going to talk a little bit about the next amendment that's coming. I'm going to get in a little more detail about it. You know, we've done a lot of listening. The full-time equivalent pooling language is being changed. The amendment you're going to get would require that in order for the hours of a particular employee to count toward the levels of or generating wage credits. The employee has to be full-time employee as defined by the Affordable Care Act. So that generally means that the employee must be offered health care benefits if the employer employs more than 50 full-time equivalents. So essentially, the amendment adds the words full-time in the definitions of the number of new employees, and then defines the term with reference to Section 4980H of the IRS code. That IRC section currently provides that a full-time employee is an employee who is employed on an average of 30 hours per week for any given month. There is more than one definition in this section because the required wage levels vary depending on the benefits sought. I think it's important to understand that we do create a lot of good jobs, and one of the reasons we need to replace 775 in the Advantage Act is simply because there are things that aren't being accomplished through that act currently. By changing the way we target the businesses that we get, we're going to know on an annual basis what our liabilities are going forward. So the Department of Economic Development, if you apply for this incentive, you've got to show how many jobs you've created on an annual basis or how many dollars you put in. So that is for capital improvements. That has not taken place over the past. And while we know that we've we've generated 100,000 new jobs since its inception, and 30 billion with a B in capital improvements. That doesn't take into account all the new jobs that are created, that people go out and buy houses, invest back in their communities and things of that nature. So to say that this is a failure, I don't agree with that. And the other thing that I think is very important, everybody says, well, we don't do anything for agriculture here. That's complete nonsense. 43% of the current agreements is going to 70% of the population in rural Nebraska. That's a pretty interesting fact. 43% is going to 70% of the people. Now, 70% of Nebraskans live in Omaha, Lincoln, and Sarpy counties. And yet, they only get 60% of the dollars that are being rent. We're putting a lot of money in rural Nebraska. Let's talk about what that is. ADM. That's a huge opportunity for us to grow our state in the Columbus area. Let's talk about Bear Crop Sciences, my district. Beef Products Incorporated in Senator Albright's district. Let's talk about Cargill and its subsidiaries. Cargill doesn't do a lot other than employ a lot of good people for the ag sector. That's in Senator Slama's, Walls's, and Ben Hanson's district. Case New Holland in Grand Island, and consolidated subsidiaries. I don't need to talk about what they're doing out there. Central Valley Ag, nobody knows who that is. That's a company that has their corporate offices in my district, but they also have Albright, Shear, Gregor, and Breezy. Chief Industries, Senator Holleran, Chief Industries in Lincoln, Grand Island. 1 minute. They're growing. Senator Dorn, E-Energy and Adams, LLC. Evonik Corporation, Ben Hanson. Flint Hills Resource, Fairmont, Nebraska. Senator Brandt, I believe that you probably haul some of your grain to them. Gavilon. Hughes has some in his district, Omaha and Bellevue, and then Greater Omaha Packing. There's all kind. I could go on, but 43% of the money that is spent currently is going to rural Nebraska. So to say that we're not doing our share for rural Nebraska is totally disingenuous. We are doing our share. And I'm here to tell you that we need to grow our whole state. I think we're doing a good job of that. I don't think we're wasting money. I don't think 3% of our budget is anything. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Coltman. Senator Williams.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. I'm excited to be here today. I'm excited to talk about the future of our state and where we're going and why we need to take action today and move this forward. I don't have any intent on working towards taking our state backwards, and that's what inaction would do today. And why do I care about this so much? It's because of my experience. I've had the opportunity to work with communities across our state and use 775. I've had the opportunity to see communities stabilize their existence and move from just surviving to thriving by the use of Nebraska Advantage. I've also witnessed those programs come to the point where they don't provide the kind of protections that are built into 720, and they don't recruit the kind of jobs that we need to continue recruiting now, high-wage jobs in particular to our rural areas. 26% of the projects that we have incented are in value-added ag. So making a separation that this does not support our state's #1 industry is simply wrong. Look at the names. Senator Colterman listed them. Syngenta, Central Ag, Lindsay, Ranke. Those are local companies. Costco, the ethanol facilities, all of which directly benefit agriculture. And 43% of the projects that have been funded are outside of Lincoln and Omaha. I'm disappointed by the fact that we have ag groups that are trying to pit economic development versus property tax. They are not mutually exclusive. There is no reason that this body can't do both. I am fully supportive of property tax reform and addressing that issue, but I also know that if we are not open for business and grow our state, we can't move forward. We currently have a sunset facing us, and that's like hanging the "we're closed for business soon" outside. Businesses that are looking to expand, whether they're already in our state and looking to expand, or companies that may come here, demand certainty. They plan ahead. They don't plan 6 months in advance for major projects. They plan years in advance. We are incredibly fortunate to have Dave Rippey on board at DED, and the work that he has done in working with our existing stakeholders to understand what our needs are for economic development today are important, and they're built into 720 and the amendments that we are looking at. We don't need to study this. We don't need to take that time. I heard that argument on something yesterday, and I would make that argument today. There's been lots of hard work put in on this. Senator Colterman has worked extremely hard, but others in the background have worked with the idea of growing our state and also supporting property tax reform. This is our opportunity to continue growing our state, recognizing that we can make a difference and recognizing that we can move things forward. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Williams. Senator Merman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Property tax relief for all Nebraskans should be our biggest concern this session. For years, this issue has been getting worse. The last legislature did not pass a comprehensive and substantial relief plan. I know that many of us, including myself, were elected solely based on the promise that we do our best to accomplish property tax relief. If LB 720 passes, we are disregarding what the state of Nebraska needs. Our constituents are struggling. Creating a new tax incentive program is not our #1 priority. What we need is property tax relief if we really want to grow. Some of you may ask why the focus on property taxes. It's because people are so worried about paying their property taxes, they don't have the money to do much else. Property tax relief would encourage huge economic development all over our state. And I'll repeat, property tax relief would encourage huge economic development all over our state. The money that citizens would save from property tax relief could be spent in our communities, whether that be shopping at the local grocery store, eating at local restaurant, or supporting the small businesses that just opened by somebody who is planning to return to the community because they want to be closer to their family. Our constituents are burdened with high property taxes, and they have been very vocal in sharing their concerns. A constituent from Minden emailed me just this morning with his concerns, and I quote, "It would be shameful for the legislature to give away hundreds of millions of dollars per year in corporate tax breaks and business incentives this session and do nothing to provide relief to property taxpayers. The needs of Nebraska families should come first." End quote. Our goal this session should be to pass a plan that gives substantial property tax relief before we give out business incentives. By passing LB 720, we are not doing that at all if we don't do property tax relief first. If we passed LB 720 before we deal with our property tax crisis, we are turning our backs on Nebraska homeowners, agriculture producers, and business owners. Colleagues, I urge you to think about this decision. We need to think about our priorities, as we talked about yesterday, and how they affect our constituents across the state. I ask you to help provide property tax relief for citizens before we incentivize corporations. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Merman. Senator Lindstrom.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of the underlying amendments in LB 720 and want to commend Senator Coulterman on his work. We have discussed this issue since the beginning of session, and working with different parties and different groups to get it to where it's at has definitely been a journey, but I think it's a good bill and deserves to be passed this year. When it comes to our incentive packages, the issue comes up with property taxes versus incentives, and I think Senator Williams alluded to this. It doesn't have to be an or issue. It can be an and issue. We've tried to tailor this incentive package to deal not only with the urban areas, but also the rural areas. The portion of my bill, LB 605, deals specifically with renewable chemicals. Companies like ADM, Prairie Catalytic, DSM, Evonik, and others. And if anybody wants to come back and read a little bit more about what those particular industries and companies are doing that are moving the ball forward in the next generation of what the ethanol plants can produce. And like I said, in the last time this bill was up, there's about 24 ethanol plants, not one located in Omaha and Lincoln. And the fact of the matter is, companies today, in this day and age, are very mobile. And when they're looking at their bottom line, looking at not only the corporate tax, individual tax based on how they're structured, they're also looking at incentives. And the fact is, we compete every day. And if we are not bringing stability to those companies that are domiciled here and or recruiting companies when they're making those decisions that are a year out, 5 years, 10 years, and further out, we are playing a dangerous game in the economy that we're trying to create here and moving the ball forward. I will continue to stand in support of property tax. I have supported the bill that had come out originally, LB 289, and will continue to do so. Like I said, it's not a or issue. We can do both, and we need to do both. Both business community and particularly the rural community and the ag community are struggling and hurting, and we need to address that. So again, colleagues, I stand in support of the bill, and we'll have some more discussion on this today, but I would urge you to support LB 720 and put Nebraska on the next line of prosperity. And with that, I'd yield my time to Senator Coulterman.
Thanks, Senator Lindstrom. Senator Coulterman, 2 minutes 15.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your support, Senator Lindstrom, and thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the next amendment that's coming up. There's an amendment that was brought to me by Speaker Scheer. We've rolled it all into AM 1934. If you want to go look at it, it's filed. But what it does, it's called a high impact fund for those of us in small communities that really want to grow and help our communities from an economic development perspective. It adds a high return on investment projects through a discretionary fund. It's a startup project. About $2 million will go into it. It's for businesses, small businesses that don't qualify for the Nebraska Imagine Act. It's in counties with less than 40,000 inhabitants. It's got a high return of investment analysis by the Department of Economic Development, who provides a recommendation to the Oversight Committee. The Oversight Committee in that has the authority to authorize the high impact projects up to $2 million in total projects annually to start with. And the Oversight Committee includes 2 persons from local economic developers, 2 persons representing counties or municipalities, 1 person representing business appointed by the governor and approved by the legislature. The Chair of Revenue, the Chair of Appropriations, the Speaker shall all serve as non-voting members. That came at the request of Speaker Scheer. He felt like it was important for those that can't get 5 full-time equivalents in a smaller town, let's use as an example, Grant. Maybe they want to open a machine shop. They want to hire 2 people and make an investment of $100,000, $250,000 in the community. There's a place they can go for that. That really helps our small communities. If it's a pilot project that I think it could be very substantial in the future, but we are listening. We are listening. And I'll talk some more when I get back to my turn on the mic here. But I appreciate the concerns of the property tax people. I would challenge you to consider the fact, though, I'm on revenue. I supported every bill that came to this floor that talks about property tax relief, and I will continue to do so.
That's time, Senator.
Thank you very much.
Senator Mann-Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon, colleagues. I rise in support of the Bowles Amendment and in continued support of negotiations on LB 720. I guess I'll put it that way. I wanted to thank the Chamber, Senator Coulterman, and a number of different senators, Senator Wishart and others, for their work and their work with me and some of my concerns, especially in the past really 48 hours. We had a very productive meeting in Senator Coulterman's office yesterday morning, talking about some of the issues that I and other senators had with this bill. I had introduced an amendment addressing the pooling of full-time employees, and following our conversation with Senator Coulterman and others in the Chamber and Department of Economic Development, that has been rolled into Senator Wishart's amendment that I understand we'll get to, or we'll try to get to soon. And as I understand that, so the problem is the underlying bill was you had to have full-time equivalents. So over the course of a year, you had to, whatever threshold you had to meet of employees, you had to people work that many employees times 40 hours a week times 52 weeks a year. But that could be split among many different part-time employees. And here, as we've written it, still have to hit that minimum number of hours, but the only employees that can count to that hours are full-time employees, and defined as under a federal statute as 30 hours, and that's related to health insurance. So you could still need to get to the full pool of hours, but you can't necessarily count part-time employees. And the reason that was important, the reason we worked on it with the department, and some of the department had some concerns, is in terms of tracking, is how do you deal with turnover? Is if somebody has a full-time employee that works for 6 months, they leave, there's a 2-4 week vacancy, and somebody else finishes out the last 5 months, do those hours count? Do those hours not count? It's not the company's fault that maybe an employee left or took a different job. They created the job, the position was there, but it wasn't necessarily filled all 12 months. And this is the way to accommodate that while still not allowing necessarily bundling of part-time, half-time, other employees. I'm really appreciative that we worked together and got to that. I'm still working through the Wishart Amendment, but that's, as I understand it, and ties into a definition, a federal definition of full-time employees. That being said, with LB 720, and I feel like I've been very clear with this with supporters, with Senator Coulterman, I do feel the real strong need to have fiscal caps, and that is one of the last things we are talking about in terms of what to move forward with 720. And from my perspective, it's a little bit of just the volatility of the expense of a program like this. And I approach it from not an appropriations committee, not in revenue, just from a general senator. I think about the priorities that I have, the priorities that my district has, the priorities that supporters, constituents all have, and the difficulty we've had in this body to not be able to pass bills with a general fund impact. I appreciate that we've taken a high standard. The high standard overall is probably very good. But when we have an issue, say, that we know is coming, that we know we're going to have to deal with, we know we're going to have to do something to fix or help mental health care in this state, but at the moment we don't really have any additional money for the floor to pass a bill that has a general fund impact. When we're operating under those constraints, I think then making sure that when we have something that could be potentially very volatile and could potentially vary in terms of its fiscal impact to us as a state, us as our budget, we need to have some sort of cap and constraint to make sure that we have predictability and can build upon that for the future. That's just off the top of my mind, that's why it's important to me. It's our difficulties as a body, having gone through some good years and lean years in terms of revenue and budgets. Knowing or at least having a good guideline of what the impact of a tax incentive plan like this is incredibly important to me, and that's one more thing I'll be looking for in order to make sure 720 advances forward in the best possible shape. And with that, I will yield the remainder of my time to Senator Coulterman, should he need it.
Thanks, Senator Hansen. Senator Coulterman, 25 seconds.
Thank you very much. I'd like to talk a little bit about property tax relief. I was wondering if Senator Linehan would answer a question very briefly. Are you
Senator Linehan, would you yield, please?
Senator Linehan, I served on the Revenue Committee with you, and I appreciate the fact that we waited to get this bill out behind property tax. Thank you.
Senator Stinner.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the legislature, I want to, first of all, start out with setting the record straight. On the forecasting board, they do consider the tax refunds portion of this. And then fiscal takes whatever those projections are and does a rate-based calculation, which means all that tax legislation that we do is considered in, and then appropriations deals with that, and that is presented in your budget book. So I wanted to clarify that. 720 is probably the most critical legislation that I faced over my 5 years and that we probably will face. And the reasoning is, do we need incentives? Well, this is a competition, folks. This is a competition between states. If everybody got rid of those incentives, we'd have a little bit different story, but that is not the case. We have two object lessons. One is the governors won the Governor's Cup 2 years in a row. Incentives had a part of that. The other object lesson is, do we really need to have incentives? Wouldn't they have located here before? Object lesson number 2. Think of New York City. Think of Amazon, $8 billion. The locals say, hey, you don't need that. And of course, Amazon could have wrote a check out for $8 billion and probably located there. But they didn't. They walked away. Even though the locals had an analysis that showed $8 billion of incentives yields you 26, 28 billion in benefits, they walked away. Incentives are important. Let's get that straightened out. Let's just walk through a history. I love history. I like looking back because I think we had some smart people in this legislature. Interestingly, in 1987, the original base for Incentive Act, 775 was passed, approved 3711-1. Ag, business, and labor supported that. The state was in crisis. Other states were calling on our companies and asking them to move their companies. We were losing people and jobs, which means that we were losing wealth, taxes, and investments. Communities were begging for incentives that would help stop the border bleed and bring jobs and investment to Nebraska. Move fast forward, 2005, LB 312, Nebraska Advantage Act was passed 45-3. 45-3. Because they knew what incentives were doing. They knew that it stopped the hemorrhaging. They knew that we needed to move this state forward. And again, ag, business, labor is supported because they understood the needs for jobs, brought us more in line with what other states were doing. As a result of the jobs and investment, Nebraska weathered some downturns better than other states, and we are able to invest in education and invest in many programs. Now we're fast forward again. We're trying to update. We're trying to better our program. 720 will do that. It's more focused and more relevant. All I want you to do now is turn to your budget book and take a look at 20 years back. Reflect back. $2 billion was our total receipts, 1996, 97. We're at 4.5, going on $5 billion of projected, and I will submit to you incentives were a part of that. And if you don't believe that, believe the revenue report that came out. Nebraska Advantage Act projected revenue gains and losses for the tax years 2018 to 2027. Over $100 million are generated in economic activity to help support the growth of our state. Take that, over $100 million per year, and it adds over $1 billion in 10 years of additional revenue support. And for the people who believe in tax, and I am all for tax reform and
1 minute.
Certainly property tax, look at what we're doing within the budget. We are taking the growth of our state and recasting sales and income tax into property tax relief. So if you're not for this expansion, if you're not for revenue growth, if we haven't connected those dots, you better start. The report done by DED talks about Becton Dickinson. Look at it, $12 million over 10 years will come in property taxes to that county. Is that not property tax relief? Is not part of the strategy for property tax relief, expanding that tax base. That is property tax relief. And to put that in to this formulation and looking at what the ag groups are doing with their emails, they just don't understand connectivity. That's where we have to be statesmen. That's where we have to say, whoa, we need a 720.
It's time, Senator.
We also need property tax relief. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Stinner. Senator Linehan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm supporting LB 720 and the amendments. And first, I want to give a shout out to Senator Coulterman. Senator Coulterman has worked incredibly hard this year on the Revenue Committee. He helped draft and helped negotiate and worked with the whole committee on the property tax relief bill, LB 289. He waited until that bill got out of committee before we even execed on LB 720. He has been supportive of both. We need to do both here. We need property tax relief. And we're going to talk about that this afternoon or sometime this evening whenever we get to it. And we need to this incentive bill. Senator Chambers unfortunately isn't here, but I remember very clearly one day before I had a meltdown here, he called me a very optimistic person. I am very optimistic. I believe that 49 senators here can figure out a way forward. We've got two good bills here. The incentive bill incentivizes better paying jobs than the program we're using now. We're ensuring that employees have to have health coverage. I remember one of the first meetings I had with individuals over this bill, I requested that every job that was created here, you wouldn't create jobs where their children ended up on CHIP. And they've answered that call. This is a much improved bill of what we have today. So being against this means we're going to be stuck with a bill that's not as good as this bill. We need to move forward on 720. And this afternoon, we need to go back to LB 289 when we're up Senator Breezy's bills up. We can do both here. What we have to do is we have to look at the big picture, the whole state, and be state senators. Not senators for this group or that group, or for this school district versus that school district. We need to look at the big picture and ask everyone to do what's right for the whole state. LB 720 is important for all the reasons Senator Stinner just said. It does generate revenue, which is what we need to help address property taxes. It all goes together, folks. We can't pick and choose. So again, I also want to thank Senator Lindstrom, who has worked hard on this and has been very productive. And the other Revenue Committee members, we've worked really hard. And now we're all tired and we're at the end, but we need to catch our second breath and get this all done. I think we can do that. So I would yield any of the rest of the time, if I have any, back to Senator Coulterman. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Linehan. Senator Coulterman, 1 minute 40.
Thank you very much. I appreciate those kind words, Senator Linehan. She's right. We have worked very hard, and we are all getting tired. We're on the 80th day. But this is important legislation, just like property tax is important property tax reform is important legislation. You know, 720, when we brought this bill, I was honored that somebody would think that I could carry a bill like this. And as I thought about it, and I've listened to people, I'm finding out, just like our state slogan, Nebraska's not for everyone, 720 is probably not for everyone. I get that. But the reality is, we've had significant growth in this state as a result of 775, as well as the Advantage Act, but they're outdated. We need to improve on them. We've done a lot of listening. We've done a lot of taking a look at what's good, what's bad. We are working on a cap. People need to be aware of that. I'll talk more about that when I get back up, have more time. But we're doing all that in good faith because we think that this is important legislation. If you can't support it, I understand that. But it is good for Nebraska. And I think that by passing this legislation, we can spend more time then on property tax relief. And I think they go hand in hand. I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Senator Coltman. Senator Hilgers.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I rise in support of LB 720, and I want to piggyback off of Senator Linehan's comments, and I will say that for Senator Coltman, if he thought that he questioned whether or not he would be the right person to bring this legislation, I would think that he's probably the best person to bring this legislation. I think Senator Coltman, over my years here in this body, has shown a consistent track record of doing all the right things, working in good faith, listening, collaborating, putting his ego aside to get the best legislation. So if 720 passes, I hope it passes. I hope it passes this year. I think, Senator Coltman, you're due all the credit for the work that you've done on this bill. I think incentives and the incentive package in particular in 720 is necessary in the world in which we live currently. I actually think that there's a world in which we could live where we wouldn't need to have incentives. I actually think there are better ways to stimulate economic development. I think with a lower tax code, a more sane tax environment where people could keep more of their own money, that encourage more business development, more business growth, more hiring, I think we could grow a lot of businesses, and we could grow the state in a much more efficient and effective way. We don't, unfortunately, live in that environment, and we live in an environment in which I believe our tax rates are far too high, our tax burden is far too high, and we have regulatory burdens and hurdles to business formation and to growth. We don't live in that environment today. We also don't live in an environment, unfortunately, in which there are not 49 other states competing against us on the incentive front. And I do have concerns that some of this in some areas is getting a little bit out of control. But we don't live in a world in which there are sane federal guardrails or otherwise that help make sure that these are more focused and we're not competing with other states in a way that sort of doesn't have any kind of guardrails or restrictions. We don't live in that world. So in the world in which we live, we need to have incentives, and we need to have incentives this year. Now, Senator Coltman has gone over in detail what 720 has done, what the amendments do, and I would defer to him on all that discussion. I agree with him. It is an improvement over where we are today on a whole bunch of different fronts. But I do want to focus on one thing in particular at my time on the mic this morning, and that is the idea that we can wait until next year. It is true that the Advantage Act does not expire until next year. That is absolutely true. There's no doubt. And if you think that you don't want to have an incentive package and you think that we ought not to do this on a matter of principle, philosophy, or because we haven't done anything on property tax yet, that I can't answer that. But if you think that we shouldn't do something this year because we can do it next year, for those people who are taking that position, who are sitting in that seat at this moment, I would challenge you and I would encourage you to rethink that position. Because if we don't do it this year, yes, as a technical matter, the Advantage Act will be up next year, but as a practical matter, we will lose out. We will be written off of project lists before we ever have an opportunity to pitch. And the reason is companies that are taking advantage of these incentives, large corporations don't act on a 15-day, 30-day, 60-day time horizon. And for big projects, when you're talking about purchasing real estate, long-term developmental time horizons, those aren't, in large circumstances, often a year or less. So you're talking about people who are making decisions for 2021 now. They're not going to make them in February of next year. And if they can't look at Nebraska and say with certainty that, yes, Nebraska will have a program in place that we might be able to take advantage of, then they'll write us off the list. So if philosophically you're of the position that, look, we shouldn't have these, and I don't support them, and I'm not going to support 720, on that ground, I respect that position. I disagree with it, but I respect it, and I understand it. But if you think that we ought to wait a year because we can, I would urge you to consider the fact that I don't think that we can. I don't think that we can wait another year, because if we wait a year, we will delay it, but really we will have projects that will be denied because we won't have the opportunity. We will get taken off those lists. Thank you, Mr. President. With whatever time, I'd yield to Senator Coulterman.
Thank you, Senator Hilgers. Senator Coulterman, 50 seconds.
I'll waive my.
He waives the time. Senator McAllister. Question. The question's been called. Members, as a point of reference, we had about 16 speakers the other day and another dozen or so this morning. That strikes me as sufficient debate. Do I see 5 hands? I do. The question is, shall debate cease? The question for the body is, shall debate cease? Those in favor of ceasing debate, vote aye. Those opposed, vote nay. Senator Coulterman.
It's a good amendment. It creates workforce development without any cost. Okay. Just puts it in the bill.
Have you all voted care too? Record, please.
28 ayes, 13 nays, Mr. President, to cease debate.
Debate does cease. Senator Bowles, you recognize closed on your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. To refresh everyone's memory, we are voting only on Amendment 1795. Amendment 1795 establishes the criteria for the customized job training program. We've previously funded the customized job training program, but not had the criteria in statute. The criteria established is in line with what's currently being used by the Department of Economic Development, but does add value and quality by establishing that job training provided through state resources must be provided by a community college, must meet industry standards, and must provide value to the workers who are participating in that training. I would appreciate a green vote on AM 1795, and I appreciate the continued discussion and conversation on LB 720. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Bowles. Question for the body's adoption of the Bowles Amendment, AM 1795. Those in favor vote aye. Those opposed vote nay. Have you all voted care to? Record, please.
28 ayes, 10 nays, Mr. President, to adopt Senator Bowles' amendment.
AM 1795 is adopted. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, the next amendment, as ordered by the Speaker and communicated to me, Senator Wishart, AM 1934.
Senator Wishart, you're recognized to open on AM 1934.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to present AM 1934 for your consideration. AM 1934 clarifies that in order for the hours of a particular employee to count towards meeting levels of generating wage credits, the employee must be a full-time employee as defined in the Affordable Care Act. That generally means that the employee must be offered health care benefits if the employer employs more than 50 FTEs. Essentially, the amendment adds the word full-time in the definition of the number of new employees, and then defines the term with the reference to Section 498(0)H of the Internal Revenue Code. And that IRC section currently provides that a full-time employee is an employee who is employed on average 30 hours per week for any given month. We are also providing that a qualifying company must offer sufficient benefits to their employees. So Senator Hansen, when you discussed, rightfully so, that we need to be supporting individuals in this contemporary reform of the Advantage Act. This is a portion that I think you'll be excited about. So the benefits typically include medical and dental insurance plans, pension, retirement, and profit-sharing plans, child care services, life insurance coverage, vision insurance coverage, disability insurance coverage, and any other non-wage compensation as determined by the board. The Department of Economic Development, if necessary, will adopt rules determining what constitutes a sufficient benefit package. AM 1903 also provides a 1% multiplier for social benefit corporations as defined in Nebraska Statute 21403, and I'll explain that in a little bit. And then AM 1934 incorporates Senator Scheer's amendment, which creates a high return on investment projects discretionary fund. These are for projects that do not qualify for Nebraska Imagine and are limited to counties with less than 40,000 inhabitants. We are targeting businesses that have high return on investment based upon an analysis by the Department of Economic Development, who provides a recommendation to an oversight committee. This oversight committee has authority to authorize the high impact projects up to $2 million in total projects annually. The oversight committee is made up of 2 persons from local economic developers, 2 persons representing counties or municipalities, and 1 person representing business, appointed by the governor, and they will be approved by the legislature. The chair of the Revenue Committee, Appropriations, and the speaker shall also serve as non-voting members. In order to pay for this, we are striking out the real property tax refund incentive under the mega project category to remain within our fiscal constraints established under this program. Lastly, AM 1934 removes the E-clause and sets an operative date of January 1st, 2020, fixes language for the extremely blighted multiplier incentive, and fixes the cash fund language where the administrative fee will be deposited for the Imagine Nebraska Act. And I did want to quickly say the benefit corporation, for those of you who are not familiar, this was an addition that I brought to Senator Coltman, and true to how he has been on this entire bill, he was open to it and supported it. So for those of you who don't know, a benefit corporation is a new class of corporation that voluntarily meets rigorous standards regarding corporate purpose, transparency, and accountability. The focus of these companies is on providing community benefits in addition to creating wealth for stockholders. So this is a really contemporary form of company. A lot of people, when they think of benefit corporations on the national level, they think of Patagonia or Tom's Shoes. And the goal is that we would be adding an incentive for these type of corporations to incentivize companies to think beyond success just for their shareholders, but success is also a mission-driven purpose that goes to support the social well-being of their employees and their community and the environment. So we have 7 benefit corporations in our state. Firespring, for example, here in Lincoln, is one of them. And if we pass LB 720 with this amendment, we would be one of the first states in the country to include as an incentive a social benefit portion of our incentive package. With that, I will yield the remainder of my time to Senator Patty Pansing-Brooks to further discuss what a benefit corporation is. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wishart. Senator Pansing-Brooks, you've got 5 minutes 20.
Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. Thank you, Senator Wishart. I just stand in support, especially of this part of the bill, and also of Senator Colterman's fine work on these efforts that he's making. I know it's a controversial bill for many people, but I think the ultimate good that's being done is really important. So in 2014, as Senator Wishart said, we passed the Nebraska Benefit Corporation Act. 35 states have since done the same thing and have passed similar legislation. Again, as she said, there are 7 registered benefit corporations in Nebraska. Gallup has done a study of millennials, and it shows that millennials are attracted to businesses who are doing good, that they are imbued within their economic strata is good work. So it's different from corporate giving when I explain it to people, because we all know about corporations that when they're having a good year, they will give some money off the top. But if they have a bad year, the corporations stop giving a corporate donation because they're just hunkering down. Well, as Senator Wishart mentioned, with companies like Patagonia that's sustainably sourced or Tom's Shoes, if they have a bad year, they're not going to quit their giving because it is all within their whole economic strategy. So they're not going to stop giving the pair of shoes for every pair they buy. They're going to look at other ways to do it. Gallup continues to show that that 75% of the millennials are interested in business with beneficial social business purposes, and that are looking at matters beyond maximizing the profits. They are structurally different from a regular corporation because the bylaws require that the directors and officers promote a social benefit of the business rather than just looking at the bottom line. It's both. So these are for for-profit corporations. The Benefit Corporation Act protects officers and directors from liability if they're trying to promote a benefit in addition to maximizing their profit as part of their duty. So basically, the Benefit Corporation must be creating a general public benefit. There must be a positive impact on society and society's environment. It may have a specific public benefit, for example, improving public health or providing low-income housing. Those are mays. But the bylaws must consider the shareholders' returns and the ability to accomplish the general public purposes and interest of the employees, the customers, the community, and social factors. So it's a whole new way of looking at business and doing good. The final requirement is that they must file an annual report to shareholders, the public, and the Secretary of State regarding the effort to pursue the public purpose. So I think this is a new world of business. We just had the first ever conference in the Midwest was this past week. And we had national speakers who came in from all over, and we're thrilled that this was starting in the heartland. It's not that it's starting, but that the movement is gaining momentum here in the heartland. It's really been sort of a coastal effort to date. So I'm really excited because I think it's a way to attract millennials. They felt it was wonderful to have this beginning in the heartland, this giant movement in the Do More Good conference. And I could not be more pleased to have this added so that we can stand out and attract millennials and get people to move here because of the good that we are doing in business. Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. Thank you, Senator Wishart.
Thank you, Senator Pansings-Brooks. Members, we had 31 speakers speak to the Bowles Amendment. There's still a long queue. We're going to keep the queue intact over the break. Items of the record, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, enrollment in review reports 323, 323A, 334, 334A, 460, 468, 492, 511, and 592, 686, 686A, 690, all reported correctly engrossed. Studied resolutions 232 through 234. Senator Albright would move to recess the body until 1:30 p.m.
Members heard the motion to recess. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say nay. We are in recess.